Hey, good morning again, everyone. I think we can begin this session. But before we go on to Unit 3, which is what we are continuing with today, we're starting Unit 3. I have a bit of an issue with my laptop from Thursday. Aside from that, I've had no electricity from yesterday. So I don't think we're going to have like a full lecture. It depends on I'm using data right now, so I'm using my phone and I'm using the laptop. So I've linked the two. So I'm hoping that it the data will last. I'm not sure whether my battery life on my laptop will last, but I'll flip in between the laptop and my phone to see how far we can go. So please just bear with me for today. Doesn't seem to be working in my favor from yesterday. All right. So we've unpacked Unit 1. We've unpacked Unit 2. We looked at your assessment, which is assignment 1 for Unit 1 and assignment 2 on Thursday for Unit 2. And we unpacked how you should actually attempt those assessments. Um, and we also refreshed on what takebacks you got from that. All right, Devashri?
Thanks, Prof. I was just looking at assignment 2.
Yeah.
Do we need to infuse academic references into our reflective piece or just use the concepts in terms of the actions that we already carry out and perhaps reflect? I think the assignment also requires us to reflect on what we do differently and can
Yes.
actually add to Lee's framework. So
Yeah.
I'm just worried. I mean, do I have to go and find some readings or,
No, I think your final assessment is more of the references. These assessments are individual assignments, so it's not, I think, necessary at this point to put in references because you're reflecting on your own work. Okay? And a lot of the stuff that you may do could be different from what's on that table, and you may not have a reference that's going to support it because you may be doing something completely different, something completely new. Okay. So yeah, for the individual assignments, it's not really necessary for you to put references, but for your final assessment, yes.
okay, thank you so much.
The work plan, no problem. Okay. So, Unit 3 goes on to guiding postgraduate students reading for a research project. We went extensively into how students in the academic literacies, their skills in terms of specifically writing. How do they write? How do they comprehend? How do they understand? Okay, so putting their voice into a written document or into a written report. But what happens with much like your reading, I mean, your writing, you now also have reading skills. Different learners read at different levels, read at different paces, and also interpret. You may give a class of 30 students the same extract to read, but the way they read and understand it is going to differ from each other. Okay, so this is basically why we're looking at unpacking how a learner actually reads. And in this case, we're looking at the reading of a postgraduate student at various levels, whether it's honors, masters, or PhD. And why is it so important with the reading? As much as, yes, there's a style of writing, but there's also a way of reading because we know that for a literature review, and it makes up an entire chapter, which is about 20 to 25 pages. PhD something or sometimes goes to about 30 pages of literature, just that section, right? There's a lot of reading that needs to be done. Those of you that have done that PhD journey, that master's journey, you should be familiar with this, how to write up that literature. But before you actually start writing, it's how you read the work that you are collecting information from, whether it's conference proceedings, whether it's journal articles, whether it's textbooks, book chapters, newspaper articles, current literature, whatever source you are using, but how do we actually read? How do our students actually read? And do we, as supervisors, teach them that these are the ways in which you need to read and extract information? Has anyone actually done that on their supervision journey? Anyone?
Prof, can I tell you what I did? And sometimes you just kind of figure it out along the way.
Yes,
Obviously, we're learning formally now, but
yes,
so with the honors students, I find because of the 8 months in which they have to produce their research report,
yes.
it's a very, I think, it's very like, uh, yeah.
It's a
So
daunting task, especially with the time limit, the time
So
frame.
what I do is, I once I've aligned students' research interests with my interests and we've gotten a topic, then I actually go and I find relevant literature for them. Um, and obviously they can add on to it and build on it, but I kind of give them a framework of stuff that I think is relevant. And I put it into a table and I say to the students, right now, suss out how this, from this article, how it actually applies to your study and where it actually goes into your study. So I do that for them, and it's worked really well for me because it helps with the time, but it also gives students the ability to kind of understand how to start working with the literature, because it is overwhelming once they have a topic and then they don't know. I mean, with the vast amount of literature that's out there, they sometimes get a bit lost and overwhelmed. But if I kind of provide them a bit of a structure, it kind of gets the momentum going so that they can start working with it. And they are able to, once they do this in the table, they are able to um, find common arguments, find gaps in the literature, etc., etc., and that facilitates easier progression in their um, proposal writing. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you so much for that. What actually want to ask is, how do you manage that? Because how many honest students do you have? Because that's interesting what you actually brought about having a structure, you taking the time to actually look for literature for them. I wouldn't, honors level alone, I've got 82 students, right? Postgraduate diploma, and they do a mini dissertation, as I mentioned earlier. And I'm overseeing all 82 students. So for me, so like I said, what would work for you would not work for me, you know? It's something maybe I could actually try what you are doing, but it's a daunting task, as I mentioned, because if I had to help the student, yes, you can guide them to a certain extent, have those rubrics or structures in place, tell them how to find the information, show them how to find the information, how do they read, how do they extract the information that is relevant for their topic, what goes into the literature review, because it's not, like we said, not only about writing, but it's about reading and taking out that information to put into the literature review or any part of your introduction or even your chapter 3 and so on. It's time consuming. How do you actually manage that? uh, and firstly, like I said, what's your numbers of your honors students? Like with someone like myself, 82 is, I wouldn't have the time to, and I've got masters and I've got PhD, so I don't think that would work for me.
No, 100%, Prof. The thing is, I think we've learned that supervision is an individual kind of, um, you know, an individual I mean, we all handle it differently, right?
Mm.
But at an emerging institution, the maximum honors students I get is 5 to supervise. But
Okay.
remember, they're looking at social context. So
Yeah.
they can be an array of anything, all the way from teenage pregnancy to climate change to,
Yeah.
a crime or whatever. So
Yeah.
what I actually do, and I found this works, is I kind of group the students' topics up. So if they want to look at education, then we look at any in education. So now you can see how I can direct them to relevant literature, whether that literature comes from coursework or my own research. So I can just very easily go into my databases and pull out papers or pull out stuff or just
Yes.
do a quick search and just list it down. But what I'm saying is that I'm not doing the literature review for them. I'm not doing the reading to structure their proposal for them, but I'm giving them momentum to actually
Yes.
go out there and build that confidence to go and engage more, because now they get to see that there is relevant literature.
Yes.
Yes, that's what I do.
Yeah, no,
Okay,
I've
thank you.
started this thing where, thank you so much. I've started this thing where I've also, and I mentioned this in Thursday's class, I also group them up into similar topics, similar discipline areas, research areas, so to speak, and then I cluster them and I group them, and they would be using, there'll be like an interchange of the literature that they are reading and so on, right? And they help each other that way. Um, it has been working, but yeah, I think the balance with the time frame and large numbers and how we supervise. But I also found now the university uses Scopus AI. Scopus AI actually generates specific literature for you to read if you input and prompt it with the keywords and for your research area or for your topic. And I found that useful for the students as well, especially for large numbers of students. It kind of builds a framework for them already on what to put in the literature review. But it's still up to the student to go and read all those articles and manuscripts that it's suggesting in order to extract the information that is needed for the literature review. Just remember, reading is a lot. When it comes to research, there's a lot of reading. And I think this is also very important in that students need to be guided more on the reading than the writing. Writing is also something important, but it's two separate aspects. And then you have learners, like we said, you've got textual learners, you've got visual learners, right? Some learners or some students reading a whole lot of theory, just reading. They don't adapt to that because they're not textual. And then you have students that would gravitate more to drawings, charts, diagrams, cartoons and stuff that is relatable. They can actually use in their study, right? So it's also how they read, how they attracted. I was also, it was brought to my attention about, and I think we did speak to the about this, is you have differently abled scholars and those that have are visually impaired in terms of not just blind, but also have a problem seeing color. Like with myself, as much as you see my slides, it's white on orange. I prefer to have the black because I can't read white writing. White writing for me is a problem. I wear glasses full time. I have an issue with my eyes. With astigmatism, and then the writing, the lighting, the everything is a problem for me, right? So you've got to look at students as well when they're reading the text, how it's presented to them, small text, large text, color of the text. These are things that we have to bring into consideration, not only how they read and comprehend and understand and then put it into their own opinions and write it down, but are they able to see it clearly in order to read it? So, what are the challenges that our students go through if it is not a visual presentation, if it's only writing, if it's only text, if it's only written, right? It becomes monotonous if it's just writing. And then you're just reading word upon word, sentence upon sentence, and student can get lost. Okay, how do we bring them back from them? Effective readers can do the following. It's in your content guide. Sorry, I'm flipping between my phone and I've linked my phone to my laptop and I don't have slides because I can't access my slides. So please just bear with me and follow in the guide. So effective readers can do the following. You identify problems, gaps, ambiguities, conflicts, or a range of points of views in the text in relation to, so when my students start reading, So make them read first. Read and see what's out there before you start writing. Okay, yes, we know that you have a train of thought, you have your opinions. We're going to hear your voice. But obviously, we need the literature to support that. And in order to do that, you need to identify this is the topic or the research area I want to focus on. But are there problems and gaps that exist that actually led to that problem? Because to that topic, I always tell my students, a lot of them just spitball ideas and bring in topics, right? And I've noticed that a few of the students will use AI to generate topics. But it's easy to just generate a topic, but is it researchable? Is it going to lead to feasible results? Is it a feasible research? Is it something current that is worth being researched? Is it researchable? So you need to identify if there is a problem. Okay, so you have to read literature, you have to read a lot to identify, okay, this is a genuine problem that we've experienced. This is a general problem that I saw in literature, and it's a genuine problem that is actually being experienced by this company. And, I can bridge that gap by conducting research and therefore forms the basis of either my master's or my PhD. That's generally how you would guide your students before they even um, start writing their proposal, because identifying the problem is the whole problem statement and research gap of your study. Okay. Then you can analyze the text to pose explanations that would bridge the gap and solve these problems. Use the content to connect analytical explanations to draw a bigger picture, because now you need the literature to support your claim or support your argument. You saying there's a problem that exists? Yes, literature also supports this. They concur with what you are doing. So it builds a bigger picture, and it actually forms a stronger basis for your argument where you can now debate this problem. Okay. And that is the generic trend of how we conduct research. Using languages that indicate layers of understanding. And we're going to unpack languages again, because when a student is reading, they don't have to always read in English. But this becomes a problem where they're reading in a different language. As I gave you an example of my PhD student who would read in French and then put down his points in French and also translate that into English to produce a report that is English based. But also with the translation, I've noticed that you kind of also lose the context of what you are trying to say. Because when you try to paraphrase or try to translate, you mean a sentence in a certain way and then it gets transcribed into something completely different, which doesn't even relate to your topic or your study whatsoever. Citing examples, quotes, anything that connects to the analysis that you are undertaking. Placing information in an order to explain the text process or chronology. I explain to students, it's also important when you're reading and you're writing, chronological order is very important, because if you are putting in text and references and you are citing someone that says something in 2023 and then you reference someone from 2020 after 2023, it's not in chronological order because the person in 2021 said it first. Everyone understand what I'm trying to say? So when a student is writing it, there has to be a flow. So you can't have in that paragraph starting in 2023 ending up with 2014. Okay. But the person or that reference in 2014 said it first. So you end with it. So you start with the oldest, going to the most current. Always have it in chronological order. And there must be a smooth flow. So when you're reading, also when you're writing and you're putting your ideas down, one sentence, it must not be left hanging. You put one sentence and then you start a whole other sentence which doesn't even link up. So there got to be a proper flow when you are guiding your students on how to write. Now, we as supervisors may not be doing that, right? I learned the hard way that I needed to teach my students. So that's when I do my group works and stuff with them. I start teaching them, this is how you put together. You read it, you extract it, you then put it into a a smooth flow of information where one sentence links to the next and it flows into the next. One paragraph flows into the next. It's not just writing an individual sentence, reference it, it's left hanging, and then there's no follow up or flow that introduces the next section, that builds into the next section or the next paragraph. We also have, as I mentioned, the Academic Writing Center. And the Academic Writing Center at UJ also helps students with how to develop their introductions, how to collect information for their literature review or any part of their research, how to read, how to write. And we go over and beyond, like I said, as supervisors. Yes, those facilities are available, but we also find ourselves still taking the students to the reading and writing journey, right? Um, Always ask yourself questions as to why are we putting certain comments, information, ideas into an extract, okay? Challenging ideas of various authors that have said similar things to what you are studying or what the student is studying, and how the student needs to base arguments. So we have a lot of our literature is based on argumentative writing, right? There's argumentative writing, there is scientific writing, there's technical writing. There's various different writing styles and reading styles. So how you present your work is more of an argument, because you're debating what you have, your consensus, with what someone else is saying. Are they supporting your work? And then you put forward your claim. So these are the things that you need to explain to your students on how to read and how to write. Any questions or any experiences that you want to explain or discuss with us or provide to us before we move on to the next section, which is the roles of a leader at various levels of their research? Can't really see your hands. Anyone? No one. Okay, so everyone is with me. Let's go on to the roles of a leader. Reader, sorry. So, other roles of the leader, we know that we are guiding the postgraduate students in their reading ability for a research project. And this generally involves a structured approach that moves from their broad foundational knowledge that they came in with, okay, and evolving into more specialized writing and reading and writing for literature review. This process also helps students build strong understanding of their specific discipline or field, identifying, like we said, those gaps that exist, developing unique arguments and contributions. Okay, and this is the flow that you have to have for your students when you are supervising them. The foundational basis, before we even look at the four roles of a reader, the foundational basis, which is the broad reading capability of a student, okay? Firstly, they have to read a lot of text. And they have to base this on a strong theoretical foundation, okay? And it's more about addressing their research questions and objectives. So how do they read and put it down into text? Key textual aspects would be reading books, reading articles that have shaped the discipline that they're in. And these texts provide a shared language and theoretical framework, meaning that you're going to read what other authors have said similar to your study, and how relatable it is, and how they concur with similar research that has been done, okay, specifically what you're doing in your study. Then there is also reading for a systematic literature review, okay? So everyone understand what the systematic literature review is all about. Those of you that have supervised, have you done a systematic literature review? It involves a lot of reading and dissecting of information and then writing. Anyone? has guided their student on a systematic literature review? And this is where majority of the reading comes in. No one. So if you conduct a systematic literature review, it can also be the basis of the whole study, meaning that you don't have to even produce results or conduct the research. You're doing a desktop study. And a desktop study is you're only gathering information and you're producing results based on all the literature that is out there. That is why it's extensive reading that needs to be done for a systematic literature review. And you build a framework just on literature alone. Fundo, your hand was up.
Oh, sorry, I had an issue with my laptop. I wanted to raise my hand when you asked about the systematic literature review.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because we have an issue with regard the research ethics, application for research ethics, and it takes time for research ethics to be approved. So the department in the media and communication decided upon desktop research. So yeah, because in the desktop research, in the institution or the policy for the institution does not necessarily um, a cohort student to apply or to comply with the research ethics. So what we do, we focus more on desktop research in the honors degree. So most of the students that are doing desktop, they do the systematic literature review where they analyze the literature, they analyze articles, they don't collect data, for example, they don't collect I don't know how to put it, but they don't conduct interviews, they don't conduct survey, questionnaires, and etc. But what they'll be doing, for example, they'll be looking at what has been done in that study that they are conducting,
Yeah,
and they need to indicate how many articles that they have read pertaining to that particular topic,
yes,
and they need to indicate the sample, how the sample was done. Although there is the methodology, but their methodology is basically about the literature. It's
yes,
basically about what they have read, and they need to come up with, show us the formula that they've used in terms of selecting and using those articles. What was the search word that they've used, search engines, for example,
yes,
how did they got or get those articles? So there's a lot, it's a lot, but it's a good study that I can encourage people to do, especially if you have issues with the research ethics, and it requires a lot of reading. If you don't like the literature review part, it's going to be a challenge to do the systematic review. Then I just wanted to bring that.
thank you, thank you. Yes, that is so important because, like I said, it's a desktop study, right? You're not conducting interviews, you're not distributing questionnaires, you're not doing experiments, you're not doing the physical research, the collection of data, right? But you are collecting literature. And this is where you build that systematic literature review, in that it forms a framework for the study that you are doing, and you are critically analyzing what other authors have done in a similar field that you are studying in. um, and also, I want to bring it to your attention, as much as we're talking about systematic literature review, it's a lot of reading. And this unit is all about how the learner actually reads, their reading skills before they even start writing. It's a lot of text that they have to read in order to do a desktop review or systematic literature review. One thing you need to note is that DHET is no longer giving you the units for a literature review study anymore. So just bear that in mind for those of you that are publishing. As much as we talk about systematic literature review, Fundo also touched on you have to have some kind of methodology, and a methodology has to have that framework to say that this is how you've got your framework from that literature. But be careful when you're submitting for your DHET units. DHET has gone very strict with systematic or any kind of literature review study. They want to see technical data. So that's just, by the way, something for you to remember. All right. So, in line with that systematic literature review, do we actually now guide? Devashri, I think you also touched on this in when you help your students to seek out where to find information. Do we show them? Do they know what's available? Do we show them where to get the information from? Specific sites, specific databases. For example, engineering and management, we deal with Taylor and Francis, we deal with Science Direct, we deal with JSO, we deal with Scopus, and I mentioned the Scopus AI. There's a lot of databases that's available. Now, do we navigate and direct the students towards these specific databases on where they can get the literature in order for them to read? Do we show them that? Are the
Morning,
students
Prof.
oriented into that? Yes, Teboko?
Yes, I also do that with my student, especially the honor student, because I also do a lot of literature with them. Either maybe SLR, a systematic literature review, or a bibliometric analysis. So I
Yes,
will eventually direct them to the relevant databases, maybe for depending on the domain or the area of research. So I'll just reference them either on Web of Science or Scopus, or if we are doing something in health, maybe PubMed and all of those things. And it really helps. And with also with the Scopus AI, it's very helpful. And
yes,
even though our students don't like reading, but we have to force them to read the work
yes.
after years.
I, for one, when I started, even till now, being an associate professor, I hate, I hate literature review. Like I said, don't give me text and theories and stuff to read. Give me equations, experiments, everything to work. I know the literature review is part and parcel. We have to do it whether we like it or not. But I've always had this aversion to it. I don't like reading. I don't mind doing it, but and I know it's part of our job, it's part of our journey, but I've always had this thing where I just someone talks to me about literature review and tell me about a systematic literature review. When my students come to me with systematic, it already I'm spinning, I'm seeing stars because I'm like I can't stop you from doing it, but yeah, it's just my mindset. I just don't like it because of all the reading that needs to be done. I need to have practical work, hands-on experiments and stuff. But it's like I said, if we don't guide our students, especially in the discipline that they're studying, they don't know. Especially your honors and master's students. By PhD, they know the databases that they can look at. When it comes to discipline specific, right? You've got to guide them on where to get all these articles from, what journals to read, even the conference proceedings, which conferences they can target and so on, because you get those articles that are relating to their study. And if they go into it blinded, they're not going to know, like, then it's going to be too much of reading for them. They won't know where to get the reading from or where to get these journal articles from unless you guide them on the databases. Our library as well, we have a subject librarian, which is very helpful because our subject librarian actually helps the students. They come in, they do a session, plus they also do individual sessions. Aside from us guiding the students, they tell them this is the databases you need to use, these where you need to go collect your literature, this is how you source your literature, and we have a lot of training on that. So it's quite helpful for the students, right? And like I said, Scopus AI has been really brilliant in that it even develops the entire literature framework for you and tells you what articles to use or what databases to use, and you just, well, read and extract the information, right? Mfundo, and then we move on to the role of a reader.
I think the challenge that I come across as the supervisor, especially in the when I'm supervising students that are using systematic literature review, uh, the student are actually I'm not yeah, students don't want to read, especially when you look at the session strategy that they've used. You ask the databases that they've used to search the information or to search the articles. Did you use EBSCOhost? Did you use your Web Science, Grade Literature? Did
Yes.
you use Google Scholar? Did you use AI, your EndNote, and etc.? So, what exactly that you like? Where the results were exported? Did you export your results using the EndNote 20? I know that I'm familiar with that one
Yes.
because I've done it multiple times, especially for exporting the results into. Then, when you encourage students to use your scoping review, for example, when you ask, you use the scoping review based on what preferences? Did you use your scoping review in terms of preferred reporting items for systematic review and meta-analysis, such as your Prisma and etc.? So I can say that it's challenging for students. Not that it's challenging, they are lazy to read. And you, as a supervisor, what I do, I sit down with them and I show them step by step so that um, they do the right thing at the end of the day, because all these research essays that they are writing, they are getting moderated externally. So you cannot be taking chances, you cannot be lenient with the student. And it sometimes it portrays you as the most difficult person, and you are that person who wants students to read. But at the end of the day, it works, because one of my students who graduated honors masters last year was like, oh, thank you, say. Some of my classmates are still struggling with data collection,
Yeah.
but I decided to do my master's using the systematic literature review. Yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you so much for that. So, yeah, you've got to navigate them, like you said, through your web of science. We also use JSTOR, Science Direct, and so on. You've got to take your students through it step by step. Um, so thank you all for sharing your experiences, and I want to go through, like I said, before I lose my data and before I lose my battery life. So we're going to touch on four aspects: the role of a reader, right? What you have in your content guide, and I'm going to look at it and teach you how to unpack it and look at it in a different way from what is here in your content guide. It tells you the reader as a code breaker, breaking texting code. How do I crack this? Meaning, what do you understand from it? Basically, cracking that code of what other authors are saying. What verbal and visual signs do I look for? And like you said, reading text upon text, there has to be some pattern and trends that you need to look for as well. Reader as a text participant, what does the text mean? What is the story trying to convey? Reader as a text user, what kind of text is this? How do I use it, and what might I choose not to use? So, how much do you actually dissect from it? Okay. Reader as a text analyst, this is where you are critically analyzing. So, what version of reality does this text present? How does this text attempt to do? What does it attempt to do for me? And how does it attempt to position me as a critical thinker? So, I'll go further into unpacking this, where recently it has been unpacked a lot more to And this came from, and this is research from Robert Scholes. He wrote a book that was entitled Textual Power. Okay. And textual power, and unpack more of the four roles of a reader in terms of, yes, we look at the decoding, we look at how do you interpret, how do you criticize, and also how do you create, convert what you've dissected, the information you've collected, and you're now creating something that needs to be a report. Okay. These roles also describe progression from passive understanding of a text to being more actively engaged and forming better debates and arguments when you eventually start writing. So, looking at the first one, the decoder, let's unpack it a little bit more. Being a decoder is one of the most fundamental roles. As a decoder, the reader's primary task is to understand the basic meaning of the words and sentences on a page. As I mentioned when I started the session this morning, is that at different levels, we read differently. Also, with our identities and our own characters and how we see things, our perceptions are completely different from other individuals. Okay, I read differently from how you would read. I wouldn't want to read, it'll be boring for me. So, this is just my take. I'm going to read something and then I lose interest unless it really captures me. All right. So that I can really get to the point of what I'm trying to do. It involves also recognizing the letters, linking them, and comprehending in a literal way so that you convey the meaning of that text. At this decoding stage, the reader is simply trying to figure out what the text says, and this role we learn in early literacy. So, if you look at your early days of reading and writing, so when you were trying to read, the teacher will tell you, read a sentence or read a paragraph. Do you remember in your earlier days, um, when you started reading, the teacher will tell you, read this paragraph and then tell me what it means or explain what it means, whether you did it as an individual or whether you did it in a little group. But they will give you this little paragraph from a story. They make us read it aloud and then they tell us now, explain what you read. That's the only way you're going to know whether the learner has really understood or decoded that text. Everyone with me? You have to read it, understand it in a way that you know how to understand it, and then relay it and explain it. But sometimes we may just lose the complete context of it because what we are reading is not really what we are understanding. We're seeing it for face value, but we're not reading too deep into it. So, basic literacy skills taught us that read an extract, explain it in your own words, or explain what you just read. Okay, book reviews and stuff like that, when we did with our kids, it was the same concept. You read something and then you're explaining what you read. Nothing has changed. When you're reading literature, same process. Yes, no. You're reading a paragraph, you're reading a page, or you're reading the 10 pages, but you still have to explain what is it that you have read. What did you find from those readings? And that's all decoding of the text. Thumbs up, thumbs down, everyone with me? Thank you. Then unpacking it further as a user, an interpreter, beyond the literal comprehension of reading and absorbing information, the interpreter seeks to understand the deeper meaning of the text. This involves making inferences, connecting ideas, considering text, interlinking them. The interpreter asks, what does the text mean? So it's not only you just reading and reporting on it, dissecting to see. I've decoded it. What does it actually mean for my study? They look for themes, like I said, themes, patterns, symbols, um, reading, like you say, the saying is in between the lines. And there's a lot of hidden messages that are there where you read and you don't just see it at face value first. You got to read it a few times to actually pick out what the content is. For example, an interpreter reading a poem might consider what the part not taken symbolizes beyond a literal trail in the words. So, um, it's a familiar poem. And one of the lines that is said in the poem is a part not taken or part lesser taken. So just from that phrase, does it mean that you don't walk down that path? How can you interpret just that one sentence of a poem, the path not taken? Okay, do you not walk down that path? Do you consider not to walk down that path? How do you unpack it and interpret it for the different meanings that it holds? For one person it may mean something, and for somebody else it may mean something different. So how do you interpret even a single sentence and not to take it as just literal when you are reading? Always look for trends, analysis, symbols, hidden messages, and so on. All right. Third one is being a fully visual textual participant and analytical or critical analyst. This is the third one, which is the critique. How you critique the information that you are reading. The critique moves beyond simply understanding the text to evaluating it. This role involves questioning the text assumptions and effectiveness. It also looks at, is this text relevant to my study or my discipline, and for what reasons am I going to build my argument on? What reasons am I going to use this text or this paragraph? Okay, this might lead to further evaluation of an author's argument or debate, leads to how you write a quality response, or ethical implications of the text message. The critique engages with the text from an external analytical perspective, where you're critically analyzing everything and you're comparing other works or a set of standards that you need to impose. So you're critiquing it against your own work that you want to propose. And obviously, you're building an argument not against one author, but you could build an argument against multiple authors. And what do they say? Formulate an argument against them, others' works. Okay, comparing the different works with each other, then comparing it with what you are doing. Okay, and this is also very common in academic writing because, like I mentioned, a lot of the writing that we do is argumentative. You're basing it on a comparison or debate with another author or reference or work that you have picked up that was similar to what you are doing. So that is how you form reading as a critique, okay, where you're now starting to build arguments and debates and comparing one person's work with another person's work and then with your own. All good? All with me? Okay, moving on. And then the last one is creating. You becoming a creator. So we built up now all this reading. And from this reading, we now need to start writing, playing an active role. So this is a more advanced stage where you now start creating text, your own text from everything that you have read. A creator uses the text as a source of inspiration to produce new meaning and new text and also your own work. This is where your voice, your opinions come in based on what you've already read. Creator might write either a scholarly article that builds on textual concepts, transforming all this information into a report, a final report, or also creating something completely new. This role is about the reader's generative and transformative power, demonstrating a complete mastery and internalization of the original work that you want to produce. So it's how you transform that text into, or whatever you are reading, into work that is now producible, or scholarly article or scholarly works in which we say it's either your PhD, your master's, honors, minor dissertations, even if it's just publications, you still got to guide a student on how to do publications. All right, everyone with me up until that point? So that was unpacking it a bit further, okay, from Robert Scholl's work, in that this is the textual power that you have, and you can learn a lot from just reading a particular text or paragraph, or it, like I said, unpacking even a single sentence, okay? Then we move on to reading academic text, being specific to the academic text, which is 3.3. 3.2 was the role of the reader. Possible difficulties for students in reading academic text. And this is where we look at, as I mentioned, visually impaired, okay? Then you have to look at those that are textual readers and those that are visual readers. Then you have to look at the type of text that there is in terms of large text, small text, and how a person reads. If it's bold, if it's in italics, if it's in a different color, how it is presented and how we actually reading. The text relationships is the everyday text that we read, whether it's a magazine, whether it's something on social media, whether it's on the newspapers. Some areas still have newspapers, whether you're reading something that's online, electronic, or something that is physical, hard copy. All this makes a difference, okay? And how you are embedding that knowledge and how you are reading and forming a relationship with the media that you're actually using. The richness in detail, as we said, was definitely the visual forms, graphical representation of how the text is presented. Okay. And as you just reading black and white paper, some of us can lose interest in whatever we are reading. Using numerous sources in one text. So this can be challenging when readers first engage with academic texts, because at this stage, honors and masters level, you're holding their hand to take them through each and everything that they need to do, because they don't know how to read at this point. That is why we show them the databases. That is why we form all these rubrics. We try to help the students navigate their journey just to be able to read a text that's given to them. How to structure the text, putting it into an argument, giving them templates, like Devashni mentioned. I give them templates, I give them structures, so everyone follows a similar template and structure. At your early level, novice level, you can do that, so that they have some kind of standardization, okay? And they follow this trend. But obviously, as they go to master's and doctoral level, they a bit more original in how they organize their own work. They don't need those formal structures and templates to be put in place, right? Different types of writing style, like we said, you need to be aware of how your students write as well. They write differently, and the vocabulary density, words that they are familiar with, words that we don't know. Like I I'm not ashamed to say that if somebody speaks to me, right, and they start using really big words, really complex words, I actually tell them, you know what, I don't know what you are saying. And I've come across a lot of academics, I'm sorry to say this, but I've come across a lot of academics that have advanced in their careers, sitting at similar position as mine, but the way they speak, have you had that experience of sometimes the way they articulate and the way they speak, it's, and they write like how they speak, and I feel it's too complex. People try to use, and I don't want to use the phrase like putting on an act, but to show I'm an academic. You really don't have to show or prove that you are at that level. For me, someone using big, I'll actually tell them, I've always had this thing where I try to use simple words. And even with my students, I try to use simple words because it's easier for them to relate and to understand. Now, if you're going to speak in a language or write in a language that is too complex, you're not doing your students a good service. You're not providing a good service. It's actually a disservice to the students in that it disadvantages, especially those where English is not their first language. And you have to simplify the English language for everybody. For myself as well. I'm around um, professors the whole day. Almost every day I'm conversing and stuff. But the language I use, it's much like how I'm speaking to you right now. That's how I speak. I'm not going to change the way I speak because you're supposed to be more articulate, use bigger words. No, it doesn't define you. If you can, if a person is unable to understand you, then it becomes a problem. Okay, so I'm not sure. Like I said, this is from my experiences, and I really don't like saying it, but sometimes you come across people that try to have this about themselves where they have to use such complex languages, but it's not really necessary, especially when you're dealing with students. No, students need to understand in the simplest form. That's just my personal opinion. Devashri?
Thanks, Prof. It does come back to identity, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because, now that I'm trying to finish up my PhD at this tail end writing stage, I find that my vocabulary has changed a lot. The words that I'm using in my conscious speaking are also words that I'm using in my writing.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can be too hard on the academics in terms of, the language that they use. And sometimes it's not that we're trying to be verbose, and I think students also have to learn to understand the vocabulary. And that is a fine line between not trying to show that you know too much or be egotistical in the way you speak
Yeah.
compared to, your professional voice.
Yeah.
And it's like sometimes I hear myself saying some things these days and I'm like, but Dee, that is not the way you used to speak before,
Yes.
so it's not something that I'm conscious of the changes that is happening, but I find more and more I cannot hold myself back from being too simplistic in the way I
Yeah.
speak. So I think, we just have to navigate with students, and possibly if I find that students do not connect with what I'm saying, then I'm going to have to
Yes.
stop myself and say, do you understand what I'm
Yes.
saying? And maybe try an alternative way to explain it to them. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
No, thank you so much for that. No, you know what? We all grow. I mean, myself as well. Okay, funny enough, I don't know how I'm wired, but I don't speak like how I write. I don't know why. I think also because of my home environment. I'm around kids a lot, so younger generation. So the speaking in complex languages, you only have that environment when you're at the office. You can converse at that level with other academics because yes, but I think on a personal level, because I'm not always around a lot of adults, it's different, it's difficult. And I found also with the language barrier, um to keep myself simple, like I said, it was just a personal opinion because my student a lot of our students at UJ, English is not their first language. We have a lot of international and African students. And when I say African, I mean not South African, but from Africa, and they have a mother tongue, you know? And academic writing is not given in your mother tongue. English is the medium and the mode that we need to follow in South Africa. So them coming in, it made it a bit easier. I think that's where I'm coming from, in that yes, we can maybe amongst our peers speak in a certain way, and we speak the way that we write because we've evolved so much from where we were at an honors level to a PhD level. I mean, we're writing quite advanced stuff. right? The way that we write and put our thoughts down. So obviously it's going to come out in the way that we speak. Absolutely acceptable. But like I said, with our backgrounds, I'm not sure, like, for those of you that only deal with South African students, it's a bit easier. But when you're not dealing with only South African students and you have international students, and not just from Africa, from globally, UJ has a large international pool of students, and it becomes a bit difficult with the language barrier, with the vocabulary that you use. I think that is why I try to be as simple, the language as simple as possible, because it needs to be understood by them. Um, and the words that we use, especially in English, like you said, it's going through additional difficulties because it's a new language that they have to learn. Sometimes students have to actually take an English class. Some of them, when they come to UJ, actually have to take an English class to read and write in English. And it's quite disadvantaging because it takes them back from their studies. It sets them back a few months before they actually get into their studies just to grasp the English language. Okay, so that was, like I said, just how we speak impacts also vocabulary for the students and how they understand us, but if we amongst ourselves, it's easy to comprehend and to understand and use a different style. Like Devashri said, it identifies us. Now we have different characters for as a supervisor and as a colleague or peer when you're talking to your other colleagues. Okay. 3.4 unpacks what additional difficulties might postgraduate student encounter if reading in an additional language, much like what I just mentioned now. How do you navigate your student that is reading? And I think the translations really help in that. And I keep going back to my student translating from French into English. It comes with its advantages and disadvantages in that the student's not first language, but when they do the translation, it kind of also deters you from what you're trying to say because it may change the context of that sentence. You may be want to say something, you're saying it in your language or you're writing it in your language, but when you translate it, it may just end up, especially with academic writing, it may just end up meaning something completely different. How do we navigate those of you that have had to deal with students whose language is not English, their first language is not English? How did you deal with that? How did you overcome that? Anyone? Nobody works with international students?
So, Prof, for me, it's the boss. So, what I would normally do if I encounter a student, I know on campus at UJ, we do have a center for English translation. Yes. So, I always refer them there when maybe when we are starting from the beginning so that they go there and then they assist them with English. At some point, I could see that there's improvement with their write-up as well.
No, it's helped. I've done that as well.
Yes,
I've also
yes, I
sent
do
the
that.
students.
Even with the undergrads, it also helps. Yes.
Yes, with their assignments.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
No, it has, like I said, UJ has those resources. Other institutions, I'm sure you all have those resources as well. And again, it's only so much we can do as academics. You can take a horse to the water, but you can't make it drink it. There's only so much you can do. Sometimes the students will not want to seek those services, but it's there. And a lot of the times, we tend starting them off with the English studies before, or like just in short learning program or something to just build or enhance the background that they already have. Because some of them come in with little to no English skills. Vundo?
The reality is that it's not only the international students that are facing challenges or battling with
Yes.
English, even the local students, sorry, are quite having challenges when it
Yes.
comes to expressing themselves in English.
Yes.
Especially your Queens have three students whom their language or that they were taught in their mother tongue.
Mm.
So now, when they come to the university and the medium of instruction is English, and the language that we use in class, it is English. When you're writing, when you're expressing yourself, whether you want to consult, because they are now familiar with you that, okay, Mr. Khadebe only speak English. We've never heard him speaking isiZulu, although I'm a Zulu. Then, even if I speak to someone who's black of color, then I will speak in English because it's difficult for me to know whether you are Zulu speaking person, Xhosa speaking person, Venda speaking person. So I just want to accommodate all students because yeah, you cannot be telling are you Zulu speaking or Xhosa speaking. That's rude.
Yeah.
Then when it comes to writing, I think when they do, the first thing that I've noticed, that I've observed, it is there is a lot of direct translation. I think it's the matter of thinking in their native language and direct translating that into English. And when you read it, trying to comprehend the text, trying to comprehend what they are trying to say, then it is not meaning what they wanted to say. So it loses the quality, it loses
Yes.
that content that the student
Yes.
attempted to say. So I think it's the challenge across all students who did not study English, who did not study their modules or subject in schools in English, and their modules or subject were taught in their native
Their
language. So
native
I just
layer.
wanted to bring that on the table here.
No, most definitely. It's not only but I found more challenges with the international students, right? Because some of them come in with no background, and they were taught, like you said, in their respective languages. And when they come, obviously, to a university or institution that is English medium, they tend to struggle. That doesn't go without saying that the local students, the South Africans, don't struggle either, because they do. There's a certain way that things need to be written, and how you convert what you've read into the written word, and putting your thoughts down, you can also lose, like you said, that context. So it's very important. That is what I'm saying. How you navigate your students before you even get to the proposal writing. You need to actually know, can they write? How do they write? How do they comprehend? How do they read? All these basic literacy skills are so important before the actual research can be conducted. Kenny?
Oh, thank you, Prof. And yeah, I just wanted to add another element as well to what has been said, and I think it has been touched on as well. That I've also found that some people speak well, they speak good English, but when it comes to writing, it's almost like another animal altogether. So sometimes you get a sense that this is more spoken English that is being written here. But what I've often done is to encourage them to read academic material as well, because the more they read, the more they kind of learn these kinds of the way to write in a formal way. So even some people who speak good English sometimes struggle to write it well. Like you said, written English and spoken English are quite different as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'm going to use myself as an example. You've heard how I speak. This is how I speak, but the way I write is completely different to how I speak. So I'm on the other side, not very articulate in the way I speak, but my writing is good. Um, Yeah, so there's a lot of aspects putting into the reading, the writing. So, like you said, the written word and the spoken word. Um, and we've touched on a lot, which takes us right up to Unit 3.5, which says now, and this I want to ask you, as supervisors of postgraduate students, right? Not only just supervising, but even taught modules. What reading strategies could be helpful to the postgraduate students? Now, we've taken all these factors. You guys have also unpacked it, looked at all the different factors that can impact a student's reading and how they write or put it down into the written word, right? Now, what strategies have you used? And we've unpacked quite a few of them through your experiences. But let's look at it. Before we go on our tea break, um, how did we help our students? Teboko and I mentioned about the English Center, the Writing Center. This is all the resources available for the student to help them to write. Devashri, I remember you saying, and it always plays in my mind about the group work, which something I've learned from you, and I'm actually going to try and use it a lot more, especially with such large numbers for the honors group. It's you only one supervisor, and you have a lot of students that you are supervising. How do we balance that, and how do we get them back on track for the reading strategies? So what strategies can we put in place? Something for you to unpack and think about, right? What are you doing currently with the reading and writing? I'd like to hear from other institutions. What's actually being done? We've given
Well,
you some of what UJ has done. Yes.
so I think I want to start off with my honors class of the way so I was just given a new module that I had to develop and start teaching. So I think we all know how that goes, that we have to get ourselves
Yes.
familiar first with the
Yes.
material. So as I'm building the module, um, I am now giving my honors students readings, and I find that I open them up in discussion before we start. And I say, well, just tell me, how do you connect with the reading? Was it difficult? Was it hard? What was the most significant thing that stood out for you? And once we build conversation that way, I see that the students are connecting to the reading, because now, and before you say, well, read, and then you expect to have a class and no one's read and everybody's taking a chance. But now that I've developed this culture of starting the lecture or the seminar with this, give me feedback of what you've read and how you connected to it, I see students are actually doing it more, and we are able to get better discussions. I could see this transferring into research supervision practice, especially in my group settings, where students can actually speak to things. And, it's about building that culture of connecting to material, but also holding them accountable to doing the work. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for that. And that's what you need to do. As much as they're at that honors level or master's or PhD level, but you got to still start with the base. I've also started a new module this semester. So, relatable, much like any new module, you got to do the reading, you got to extract the information for what is needed for that unit or that chapter, and it's much like even with this academic literacies. There's a lot of reading that I have to do in order to give you a lot of examples. Okay, yes, some of them are a lot of my experiences, but um, yeah, a lot of the work we need to read and extract the information so that we can impart that knowledge on to our students. So imagine the student now has to do the same thing. They reading, they extracting, and then they obviously have to now put their written word, the written word into a report or final dissertation or chapter or whatever the case may be. But how do we now guide the students? And I think we've unpacked it quite a bit on how we actually deal with the students, how we actually help the students. We've given you UJ perspective. Those of you that are from other institutions, what resources do you all have similar resources like what we have? I'm sure. For what resources are there for your students at your various institutions? Anyone? Fundo encouraging peer review and feedback, set up peer review sessions to build critical evaluation skills. also very important. And I think that's where the group sessions come in, because with that peer review, the group sessions, they're reviewing their peers and their colleagues on the work that they are doing. And you get critical feedback because it's similar content that they are critically analyzing each other on. Anyone wants to share experiences outside of UJ?
Prof, I'm going to go and say University of Mpumalanga, my institution, an emerging
Okay.
institution. So
Yes.
resources are still in their developmental stage. I know after years, but that is the reality. And sometimes it comes down to funding and budgets and those kinds of technical things that actually compromise the availability of resources for students. We had a writing center going. It kind of disintegrated as the person left the institution. No one's really picked it up. Who's accountable for it? So I think institutional barriers and blockages really sometimes compromise, our academic project and what we're trying to do with students. So, from that perspective, I don't find too many resources at my institution, except the library, which all credit to them. If
Yeah.
I ever send students to them, they help them quite a bit. If I ask them to come to class to do something or to hold a workshop, so the library is just the one resource at my institution that I can, really depend on. But in terms of the other resources, no. I think more institutional targeting needs to go into that development.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So thank you so much for that. So I think what you're saying is a lot of support needs to come from more resources other than just the library providing help to them, right? I think because UJ is now moving more towards a research institution. Okay. Yes, it's a traditional university, but you can see we rely heavily on research. Okay, research impact. So I think because of that, we have all these resources available for the students, because a lot of from the masters, but not even from the honors or masters level, but from our third year students, they are doing projects. And this is academic writing that their literacy skills they need to have. Even from the first year, you're teaching them how to write their assignments. So I think that is why we've put in those resources. Also, well, we're 20 years old now. Pumalanga, I think a shorter time. But you guys are evolving. You will progress. And I'm sure when you have the infrastructure, you will get the resources available. Also, you got to look at, do we have the funding available as well as institutions to enforce and have all these resources and infrastructure in place for the students, okay? To make it a conducive learning environment for them. And with that being said, you can read the remainder of Unit 3.5, where we discuss reading in groups, where we discuss guiding the students on how to develop their reading and writing styles. Also, it goes on to various process and characteristics of a reader, and we went through 4 roles of the reader. We looked at unpacking the research gaps, the research problems, comprehending the text that we are looking at, visualizing and creating images that go with the text, because we're not only writing, but we also representing it visually in terms of charts and diagrams and tables and so on. Making arguments and inferences, comparing different authors and studies, um, synthesizing the work to give you a written document. Okay, so these are the things that we've summarized and we've unpacked from Unit 3.1 right up till 3.5, which takes us into a short tea break. Can I have you back at 10:45? I want to try and push as much as I can with whatever battery life I have. And I will just unpack 3.6 and 3.7, and then we'll continue the rest on Thursday, if that's okay with you guys. All good? All right, and thank you so much for being so patient with me. I'm going to stop the recordings and then I'll start again. Yeah, so I'll see you back here 10:45. Thank you.